that, I'm going to introduce Tom St. Clair, and he's going to talk about what are fuel treatments and what is their purpose. So take it away, Tom. Are you going to stand over here? Are you going to move the microphone?
I don't think the camera and my slideshow show at the same time, but I gotta click through the slides. So this is just like a little bit of an introduction before we get into the weeds with all the different perspectives on everything. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we do fuel treatments, what some options are, and some of the effectiveness studies with an eye towards Alaska. Like I know there's some people that aren't from Alaska here, and there's a bunch of fuels specialists that aren't foresters, and there's a bunch of foresters and probably some miscellaneous folks. But just a little bit of background. So this first slide is the main point. Here in Alaska, we have this infrequent, large stand replacing wildfire, severe fire regime going on. And it's a little different than the general dialogue in the lower 48 where they're talking about restoring things from excluding fire. They have more frequent low intensity surface fires. So yeah, I don't know if as though we're always trying to create a natural ecosystem here. So this slide is it's on the AICC website. It's a web mapping tool that you can play with, but this is a fire history map. You can see the Brooks Range is at the top of the picture on the left, and the Alaska Range is at the bottom, and the interior Alaska is where most of our large fires happen, although the west side of the Kenai Peninsula looks pretty similar down at the bottom of the slide. And then on the right side, I zoomed in on Fairbanks, where we're at for the meeting, and I put the it's the reported fire start point of origin, so the dots, and the color coding is by decade. But you can see that we don't let 100,000 acre fires get going in the middle of Fairbanks, but there's a lot more ignitions because we have humans and lightning in that area. So we have some different problems that, in general, we're trying to let big fires do their thing where we can on the in the remote areas, and then in close to town and in the urban intermix, we have some different issues. In this slide, it's just a laundry list of different types of treatments that we've been using. What are we going to do with the material? Sometimes they bury it, chip it, chop it, leave it, burn the piles, or even produce a usable product. Which is kind of nice. And I think at some point today we'll talk about the shape and scale of the treatments, and have a couple other slides that will talk about that. But a lot of the bigger treatments, they end up being heavy equipment. It's really hard to do a spruce prescribed fire. It turns out if you light the fire, it still costs a lot of money to mop it up the same way if the lightning lights the fire. You just have this deep organic layer, and it's tough to deal with. And we can do some grass burns, some spring aspen burns have been successful, but most of our spruce burns have been really tough to deal with. So this is a demo site I was involved with DNR in graduate school, and it's here in town. But the point is, I guess, some of this background information, like there's places, I think Jarvis Creek down in Delta, Dan Reese did a bunch of different treatments. There's some places where you can see a lot of these treatments near each other. Shear blade, mastication, thinning, this roller drum chopper. I think this picture is of a tub grinder. We tried to grind up some woody vegetation into some chunks and use it for road fill on that Cache Creek logging road. It's not as good as gravel. We don't. The DNR doesn't do this. It was experimental. These are a bunch of links. If we give out the PowerPoints to people, you can click on them, but they're mostly just showing places where we can see how effective Alaskan fuels treatments are. This is a really cool publication that Randy Jant and a bunch of folks put together. It's kind of a picture book, and it just people respond to pictures, but it shows a whole bunch of fuels treatments and has a little bit of verbiage about the different research that's happened on them. And I think there's some shaded fuel break, thinning and pruning going on, and some shear blading in this cover photo. Then this trial by fire idea, we actually did that out at Nanana Ridge, just kind of west of Fairbanks. The big blocks are shear bladed, and you can see some faded kind of thinnings. Up in the top right corner, there's a little polygon. It's not quite square because the part that the crown fire pushed into is black, but the fire did come down, get on the ground, and then it just kind of fizzled out on the day that we did the prescribed fire. That was 2010, 2011. It was a while ago. And there was a wildfire in there since then. I think Eric Miller wrote a little paper about. This is down on the Kenai, a little mastication on the left, and then the photo on the right has a community down in the bottom left corner, and the fuel break goes around it. And you could see some little dots in that fuel break. I think they're to break up the sight line so people don't take really long shots on moose. You know, whenever we have wildfires and clearing treatments, it opens up the moose hunting opportunities quite a bit. It's really hard to see them through the forest. Near communities, that was an issue they identified. And then up in the top right, it's like a Batman emblem or something. It's a wildlife refuge over there, and they want fire and they want to do a spruce burn. But I guess my point is it's really hard to put this huge fuel break in, but it's near that community, and we still haven't been able to do it. There's a few projects like that. They're tough because of the mop up with the organic layer and how long these fires last. This is going to be on the field trip. I think it's up north of town. The Shovel Creek fire is on the left side of the picture, and the right side didn't burn. So this is a big deal in my neighborhood. It just felt like we were in a war zone with all the helicopters flying over my head. But one of the things this fuel break enabled people to do is get in there and clear a little bit of vegetation off of it that had grown up since the fuel break was created, and then they did a burnout. And so then the team was able to demobilize and go home earlier than they would have been if they had to wait for the fire to come into town and be here all sudden. It's still pretty expensive fire, but it did help deal with it. And this picture is one that Dan Reese put a lot of energy into. It's the Jarvis Creek, and it has these kind of polygons. They did build a gun range south of it after the fuel break was installed, but it just kind of shows they don't always have to be solid and linear. I think there's some places on ridges that were cultural sites that we thinned instead of clearing. And the idea here is to just kind of break up the flaming front. Is that there was a big patch of spruce, and Delta Junction is on the top end of the photo. The thought was if there was a fire in the south to north prevailing wind direction to Isabel Pass and the Alaska range there, we'd want to push it north, and this fuel break might just slow the fire down, and then there's a more solid fuel break on the north end that could be used to try and deal with the fire. Then this habitat stuff, we talked a little bit about bringing other objectives into the mix. This is Tom Paraguay, one of our AKSAF members. He's a wildlife biologist, and he's standing in a few-year-old thick aspen regrowth stand. That's what he likes to see after his spruce treatments. Finding a picture of a shear blade on that right. This roller drum chopper, people talk about it up here in Alaska a lot. It's supposed to kind of chop up the material, get it down on the ground faster. That's a picture of it. And then, self-loading log trucks. Sometimes we're lucky enough to get product. Pretty close to the end, but I wanted to talk about this known sites database. So it's pretty intuitive. We should be doing this stuff close to town, but this is all the fire management officers and line officers. They should have access to this website and these little houses and other icons for mines. Some of them are trespass cabins. Some of them are owned by the government. Some of them are private in holdings. And in my job, we have these native allotments. I think there's a couple of them on this map, but they're really small, but they're located out in the area that we would like to allow to burn. So some of the agencies have done smaller fuels treatments around these remote sites as well. It's really a challenge financially to operate out there, but possibly as we get better data and figure out how many we've already treated around during wildfires, we can more of that. Let's see. And this is a kind of similar thing. this Firewise versus a community fuel break. Like, what's a person's responsibility for their own private property versus what's maybe an inherently government kind of thing that protects the rest of us. We do have this publication and sort of gives people guidelines on how much to clear and where to finish. So let's kind of talk about why do we want to do fuels treatments, what are some options, and are there some effectiveness studies? Yes, it's there. I don't know if people have questions or not. It's a quick overview, and we'll get into the panel discussions. Here in Dallas, I can check maybe our chat question. Cool. Yeah, so there is a message from our helpers there in the lower 48. If you do have questions, you can just pop them in the chat virtually and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. Or we might be able to insert in the middle if you have a computer in the back. Oh, question. I got to move the microphone over to Chris.
I was curious if perhaps you could summarize of the types of fuel treatments that have been done, which ones have proven to be the most effective when fire actually impacts one of those treatments. If there's any information you're aware of or publications that would provide that information.
That's a good question, Chris. I think a little bit it's a matter of perspective. I think, these fires, they'll jump like multi-lane highways. They jump the Tanana or the Yukon River sometimes. So the most effective is a fuel break with no fuel. The fuels treatments are always like sort of a compromise, and kind of get into that a little bit. The world isn't on fire all the time, every year, and things are often like threatened, like that Sterling fuel break, for example, down on the Kenai, the Swan Lake fire a couple of years ago. It didn't burn up to the fuel break. No one burned off the fuel break, but it did enable the folks managing that incident to avoid evacuating the city, right? And it allowed firefighters to get in there. So I just encourage people to think about fuels treatments in concert with firefighting efforts and as a compromise, because we don't really want to live in a parking lot. But yeah, it's sort of a the more you do, and the more effective it is. We raise the crowns of the trees and space them out. We can severely reduce the threat of crown fire. If we take the crowns away, there is no crown fire threat. And those are the difficult fires for people to deal with. Grass fires move a little bit faster, but it's super effective to use aircraft for firefighters. Really a lot easier for us to manage. All right, we'll hear some other perspectives on that hopefully today. That's why I have so many people